If you follow me on Instagram, you would have seen this delicious looking chocolate cake filled with decadent chocolate pudding and covered with almond praline on my Instagram stories. Since then, my DMs have been filled with recipe requests, so I'm happy to make it again and share it with you this time. Let's get started. Let's start by making the chocolate cake. First things first, I'm adding super fine sugar, which is also called castor sugar, into a bowl. To this, I'm adding vegetable oil and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now, using my whisk, I'll beat really well at this stage because this is where you incorporate a lot of air into your batter. This is what will make your cake super light and fluffy. Once the mixture looks light and pale, I'm going to add in the hung curd. Just make sure it's not too watery. You could also use Greek yogurt and some milk, which is at room temperature. Now, time to sift the dry ingredients in. I'm using all-purpose flour, which is maida, baking powder, baking soda, and some cocoa powder. Whenever you're making an eggless cake, I always recommend you sift the dry ingredients in because this is what makes your cake slightly lighter. Now, using my spatula, I'll fold the dry ingredients in and mix only until I don't see any large flour pockets in my batter. My batter looks good. Now this goes into an 8-inch round pan lined with parchment paper. I'll bake this in a preheated oven at 180 degrees Celsius for about 35 to 40 minutes or until a skewer inserted into the center comes out clean. And while we wait for the chocolate cake to bake, let's get the work started on my favorite part, which is the chocolate pudding. And trust me, this is one recipe you need in your lives. To make the chocolate pudding, I'm setting a saucepan over medium heat. Now in goes 2 cups of milk and half a cup of cream. The cream that I'm using here is fresh cream. You could also use heavy cream. I'm also adding in 1 cup of roughly chopped dark chocolate. I'm using a 55% dark chocolate from Amul. And a teaspoon of coffee powder, which is optional but adds a nice kick to your pudding. Now the idea is to let this cook on medium heat and come to a slight simmer. Meanwhile, in a separate bowl, I'll start adding the dry ingredients. I'm adding super fine sugar, cocoa powder, and 3 tablespoons of cornflour, which is what will make the pudding super thick. Just give it a good mix so that everything's nicely combined. Now once my milk mixture comes to a simmer, I'll take it off the heat and pour the hot mixture into the dry ingredients while continuously mixing so that there are no lumps. And once my mixture is nice and smooth, I'll pour it back into the saucepan and cook it for a few more minutes or until it comes to a boil. So the pudding's ready. It should coat the back of a spoon. I'll take it off the heat now, and while it's still warm, I'm going to add in a splash of vanilla extract and some cold cubed butter. I'm using salted butter here. I'll mix it in and the pudding is ready. So both my chocolate cake and my chocolate pudding are ready. Now let's work on the third and the final element, which is the almond praline. The first thing that's going to go into this pan set over medium heat is some granulated sugar that I'm going to add in an even layer. Next up is some water, and then all you need to do is to wait patiently for the water and sugar to cook undisturbed, bubble up and caramelize. Once the sugar reaches that golden amber color is when I'm going to throw in the almonds. Give it a mix, making sure all the almonds are evenly and nicely coated with caramel, and then transfer it onto a baking tray lined with silicone mat. I am going to let it cool completely, and once it becomes hard, I'll break it into shards, add it into the jar of my blender, and now all that's left to do is to process it into a fine powder with a pinch of salt. Making almond praline might sound super fancy and intimidating, but as you can see, it's actually super simple to do. Alright, so my cake is ready. I've let it cool completely. Now what I'm going to do is, using my knife, I'm going to make a well in the center. Now this is where the pudding's going to go in, and as you can see, I'm leaving the edges so that I have a border, but I'm going to hollow out the center by taking out the cake crumbs. The depth of this well is about half the height of the cake, So basically I'm not going all the way to the bottom, I'm stopping halfway through. Try being as neat as possible, and needless to say, save the crumbs for snacking on later. So the well in my chocolate cake is ready. Now in goes our thick, beautiful, luscious chocolate pudding. And once that's in, I'm going to cover the entire pudding surface with the almond praline that we'd made earlier. So if you're bored of making the same old cakes with frostings, it's time to take things to the next level and introduce pudding cakes in your kitchen. I hope you guys will give this recipe a shot and let me know how it turns out in the comments below. I'll see you guys next week with another recipe. Until then, happy baking and take care.